Welcome back to the channel. There was recently an article on CBR talking about just how toxic the comic book fandom is. And I say it's not really the fandom that's toxic. I think the media are toxic. And most of the issues that they're talking about in this are basically sprung up by the media themselves, where they create arguments between people because they need some clickbaity stuff to happen. Here talking about that is big old comic book fan Doc. How you doing, buddy?
I feel like I fell into a fucking time warp. And I just read an article from 2018. Like, I had to look at this thing like 4 times to make sure that it wasn't just like there wasn't somewhere on it that said originally posted in September of 2018.
Yeah, it's not exactly a lot of new ideas. And it felt like they were talking to you, Doc. The first big talking point that they had, manga or comics. Manga has taken the U.S. by storm. The late 2010s and early 2020s have seen manga skyrocket in popularity. The prevalence of anime on American airways played a huge part in a robust industry has formed around the medium. Manga books outsell superhero comics by a wide margin, and this has led to both fandoms clashing in the worst ways. The irony is that the only difference between manga and comics is cultural. Fans can appreciate Western comics and Japanese books at the same time, and they often do. It's not an us or them situation. The clashes feel bizarre as each side fights a battle that no one else is even imagining. Well, they're imagining this, Doc, because I don't really see a lot of clashes between manga fans and comic fans. I see a lot of clashes between the comic book media trying to take manga sales and act like DC and Marvel are doing good. That's what I see.
I feel like this is less about anything else and more about them trying to co-opt manga sales to prove that somehow that the comic book industry is healthy. When it's really, really not. Yeah, manga sales are fine. They're great. Congratulations.
They're not just fine. They're absolutely amazing. And guess what, Doc? Not too long ago, sales of Ford and Chevy and a lot of American car companies were dwindling while Japanese car companies were doing great. Guess what you couldn't claim? American car companies were actually successful because Japanese car companies were being successful. Just because they're the same thing or in the same genre doesn't mean you get to claim the success of something else that's actually working.
Marvel and DC aren't healthy just because Shonen is making a fuck ton of money. That doesn't make sense.
And the argument that I see online is the comic book media trying to say comic books are better than ever. Things are fine here. Nothing to see here. And people pushing back and being like, things aren't fine. Marvel and DC are not popular right now. They're not keeping up with their Japanese competitors. You don't get to claim their success as success for American comic books. And really, that's the only argument I see. They're just making shit up to say that comic book fans are bad people.
And it's obviously an attempt to deflect the fact that, you know, they've essentially ushered in a complete industry collapse.
Absolutely. The next one that they talked about was comics Twitter. Twitter can be an entertaining place, but it also has a vile element. That has been exacerbated in recent years. In comics, worst fans have put down roots on the platform. It's full of bad takes, clout-chasing podcast hosts, harassment, movie fans mocking comics, endless arguments, and the bitterest fans imaginable. Comicsgate weaponized these tendencies as a group of fans and former mainstream creators complain about the fact that the comic book industry had become slightly more diverse. Comics Twitter can be fun, and it hosts some great personalities, but so much of it is endless arguing and bigotry that it can be tiring to wade through for more than a few minutes. Well, why are they talking about Comicsgate? I don't see these dudes do anything but like promote their comic books and try to sell them.
Yeah, that's where I started feeling like I fell back into 2018. You know, back then there was actually fights between Comicsgate and, you know, the mainstream industry. Comicsgate, you know, for all of its greatness or flaws, has decided, fuck it, we're just going to go do our own thing. All we're doing is trying to sell our comic books and make money. That's it. They, for the most part, just ignore the mainstream comic book industry at this point. The only people that really want Comicsgate's attention anymore are the people that go seeking it.
Yeah, and the clout chasing is going on from like a Mark Brooks who's going out there trying to say stuff about Eric July, who I do not believe is even Comicsgate, trying to say, oh, he's having a fan art contest. This is bullcrap. And then people are like, oh, yeah, what about the fan art contest you had, Mark Brooks, and your clout chasing ass right now, to where you actually had winners, but you never actually fulfilled on the obligations of the contest?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. You get people like Mark Brooks. You get people like, well, half of the fucking industry that feels the only way that they can still maintain any degree of relevance is by going and now picking fights with people that are obviously making a shit ton more money than them. It's really kind of sad and pathetic at this point. I don't see toxicity coming from them anymore. The only harassment I'm seeing is comic pros demanding, please pay attention to me.
Yeah, and they don't even mention like a Heather Ontos who goes out there basically on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, going out there just trying to make people mad, instigating, trolling them just so they can maintain some type of relevancy, clout chasing on their own. So that one was really stupid. And like you said, that's like from 5 years ago, whatever. I guess you haven't been on Twitter in the last 12 months or even 36 months, really. The next one they talked about, anti-LGBTQIA bigotry. LGBT comics are an amazing part of the comic industry. This has evolved tremendously, mostly due to indie comics in DC, whose Vertigo imprint was highlighting queer-friendly stories in the 90s. 20 years ago, a reader could pick up a Marvel comic and see homophobic jokes regularly. Now comic companies put out queer titles from queer creators more than ever. However, anti-queer bigotry is alive and well in the comic fandom. Fans and even some creators speak out against LGBT comics and creators. They use vile terms and bad faith arguments and have no problem pretending that they're the majority. The harassment queer fans and creators alike face is astounding, and it's not just cringeworthy, it's easily one of the most toxic elements of comics fandom. I don't even know where this one was coming from either. Who's fighting against LGBT comic books? There's no problem with that. I don't have a problem with LGBT, whatever, go do your own thing. It's when they decided that every Marvel and DC superhero comic book no longer needed to be about superheroics and doing the right thing, that they needed to be about coming of age stories of LGBT community and stuff like that. Just because I'm not against LGBT people doesn't mean I go out of my way to like watch, gay coming of age movies or read gay romance novels. It's not something I'm just interested in. I don't read romance novels as it is. Why would I want to read a romance comic book about two gay dudes? It's just not my thing.
You can't sell commercial product meant for the mass audience when the real target audience is a percentage of a percentage. It doesn't make financial sense. And pointing out that it doesn't make financial sense doesn't make it anti-gay or homophobic. It's just pure business. People buy superhero comics to read superhero stories. When they decided the entire industry needed to be Vertigo queer-friendly stories is when they started getting the sales of Vertigo queer-friendly stories from the 90s, and everybody got fucking shocked by it.
I don't think it has anything to do with being like queer-friendly or whatever. People like Midnighter and Apollo, two heroes with a different slant to them who happened to be gay because the book wasn't about them being gay together. It was about them being superheroes, and they happen to also have a relationship. No one hates North Star because he's gay or whatever. People get mad when you take canonically straight characters and force them into being LGBT representative characters, because everything that you do nowadays when you're creating new LGBT characters within superhero comic books fails because you forget to actually accentuate and magnify the fact that they're heroes, and that's the journey that you're really watching. It's never about that anymore. It's all about them, falling in love and having their first kiss and boning some dude. Most people just aren't into that. And if that's the path they want to go down, superhero fans aren't going to read that stuff because they actually came for superhero stories.
Sorry, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of the ostensibly target audience, which should be superhero comic book fans, are not going to read queer coming of age stories. They're just not.
You weren't just so happy that John Kent, even though when he was 8 years old, he had a girlfriend, even though when he was aged up to 17 and went to the future, he had a girlfriend, even though when they went to future state and he was in his late 20s or 30s, he had a girlfriend, all of a sudden they just made him gay out of nowhere. You weren't just up in arms and going, oh my goodness, this is the best thing that's ever happened to Superman. So that makes you and I a bigot, apparently.
Yeah, because we point out, hey, none of this shit makes sense. I guess
that's your bad faith argument, Doc. You can't use logic in this.
Yeah, logic is bigotry, apparently. So, cool. I guess I'm a bigot.
This last one is really stupid. Not giving indie comics a chance. Every month, small companies release brilliant indie comics, spearheaded by companies like Image, Dark Horse, Boom, and AWA. There's a thriving ecosystem of indie creators. The crowdfunding scene has gifted the industry with a variety of voices, and while some indie creators eventually join Marvel or DC, their most unique work is wholly their own. Indie comics tell a variety of stories beyond normal superhero fare, showcasing the comics medium's versatility and power. Indie comics have everything, but many fans never give them a chance. Books like Saga are praised and beloved by mainstream fans. However, there are millions of other indie comics out there that fans are missing out on. A large portion of the fandom don't stray beyond the big two's most obvious borders and won't even read comics like The Sandman, The Invisibles, or Preacher, all DC Vertigo comics because they aren't superheroes. Without a thriving Marvel Comics, without a thriving DC Comics, the indie comic scene just basically dies, and mostly that's on Marvel's shoulders. They are absolutely the leader when it comes to the comic book industry itself. And because the comic book media basically killed off Marvel and DC by pressuring them to do things that their fans didn't actually want, they've killed the indie scene along with it.
Yeah, it's this isn't rocket surgery here. People
this is brain science.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, people walked into the comic shop to buy Spider-Man and Batman. They continued buying, Scud the Disposable Assassin and Milk and Cheese. They don't walk into the store, though, to go and buy the indie books. They just don't. The vast majority of readers come in for mainstream fare. And when you've pushed the mainstream audience away, they don't experiment. I mean, it's like a mall. Whenever it loses the anchor stores at either end, there's no more Macy's or JC Penney's. Guess what? That mall always fucking dies. All the little indie stores in the middle die because the anchor stores are gone. It's the same thing in the industry.
There's also the complete hypocrisy of saying that there. When's the last time CBR did an article talking about Eric July and the Rippaverse, the most successful crowdfunded comic book in the history of comic books? Yeah. Well over $3 million. Outsold a book by Keanu Reeves. Outsold a webtoon that had been out for 10 years. Even did better than EVS and some of the other big creators that are doing crowdfunding. The second issue is out right now. It's about to break the record again and be the second most successful crowdfunded comic book of all time. And they still haven't wrote a goddamn article on it. Why aren't they giving indie comics a chance?
Because the only time they do is when it's some lesbian bike riding anthology that isn't going to sell more than 15 copies in the first place. Again, Eric July, whether he's indie or not, he has tapped into a mainstream type audience, mainstream type money that they seem to, the comics media apparently fucking hates. It's not the right kind of success by the right kind of people. So they ignore it, because it doesn't fit whatever weird other narratives they have that were the reason why they started only promoting the queer books at Marvel and DC in the first place. And demanding...
They promoted Pride Anthology more heavily than they promoted Night Terrors.
Yes, absolutely. Because they've just decided that, hey, the smallest percentage of a population is who we should market our mainstream commercial product to. It's stupid. The fact that Eric July has made serious fucking bank without any sort of promotion, without any sort of even coverage, without even any acknowledgement, it just shows you that the comic book media isn't interested in being media. They're interested in being propagandists for whatever actual end game they really want to generate.
They decided that they were the tastemakers and they were the gatekeepers, and the comic book industry was going to be what they needed it to be. Well, you got the comic book industry that you wanted to create. There are no fans left. There are no sales left. And a lot of people are going to go out of business. And a lot of these creators that you think are so great, they're not going to be able to pay their mortgage, in a few months, because you put them all out of business by pressuring them into basically scaling down the actual industry itself while the characters were blowing up bigger than anyone could have ever possibly imagined. It's the dumbest thing in the history of the world, but it is what the comic book media themselves wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that they finished this article with the number one worst, most toxic thing about fandom was gatekeeping, and yet they've been the most guilty of this out of any single entity on the planet. Motherfuckers, you are the worst gatekeepers in the history of the comics industry, and it has nobody to blame but yourselves.
The comic book media are a huge reason why comic book sales just aren't there right now. In fact, a lot of people like to put them on blast. I made a video about this. They were getting put on blast on the regular. I thought it was great to consolidate it all. These guys are absolute morons, and they got what they absolutely wanted. There's also a link in the video description.